Okay, so today we're going to get our third and final installment on Brian Turner's Here Bullet. In this collection's final lecture, I wanted to address a number of things. Firstly, how Turner intentionally infuses reoccurring language, tons of it in fact, within this collection. Then, sort of on the same note, how Turner is able to utilize bird imagery throughout the breadth of his collection. Then we'll look at three poems concerning themselves with the intersection between dreams and malaria pills, strangely enough. Finally, we'll compare the poem 2,000 Pounds to poems that were inspired by the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. So let's get into it. Okay, reoccurring language. I was lucky enough, and maybe some of you are following suit, to buy a Kindle ebook version of Here Bullet. This allowed me to, on the keyboard, hit Control F and essentially search on various words within the collection if I suspected they are reoccurring. Here are a few. So we get shrapnel. That's times five. It's mentioned 5 times within the collection. That's not a great deal, but it's intentional on his part. Bomb is mentioned 7 times. Smoke in the collection is mentioned 9 times. Dream, the idea of a dream, just that word, is mentioned 23 times within the collection. Light is mentioned 30 times, which contrasts against shadow, which is mentioned 13. Wind is mentioned 14 times. Dark is mentioned 11. Ghost is mentioned 9 times within the collection. Children, interestingly enough, is mentioned 10 times within the collection. Night is mentioned 20 times. Wings mentioned 9. That sort of goes with the bird imagery. Let's see. Death is mentioned 10. Fire is mentioned 11. Earth is mentioned 15 times. Open is mentioned 14. Body is mentioned 27. There's no denying words like body and light when they're mentioned almost 30 times each. War is mentioned 12 times. Smoke is mentioned 9. Moon is mentioned 8. Blood is mentioned 26 times. That says something, right? River is mentioned 15 times. Water is mentioned 18. Dust is mentioned 9 times. Bird is mentioned 8. Uh, Fly is mentioned 7 times. Flowers mentioned 7 times. Malaria is mentioned 10 times. Pills is mentioned 10 times throughout the collection. Kiss is mentioned 11 times throughout the collection. Burns is mentioned 8 times. Leaves is mentioned 9. Crackling is mentioned 7. Okay, there were a ton more that were mentioned like 5 or 6 times. If they didn't meet the threshold like 8 or 9, I didn't bother mentioning them here. But there's so much that he infused within the collection with such obvious recurring language. The question must be posed as to why. What exactly is Turner attempting to achieve by spreading the repetition of words throughout this collection? One, I would say the recurrent language is creating an image. Much as a mosaic is made from smaller, fragmented pieces, so too is Turner allowing these fragmented shards of words to scatter across the collection's pages in order to draw a larger image, a larger tone, even a holistic theme is emerging. Think about blood and death, fire, water, dust, earth, smoke, wind, dark, shadow, light, all very elemental, all reminiscent of a greater theme, perhaps contrasting language in order to create tension. Surely we could see the connective tissue that binds words such as fire and water, light, shadow, dark and night, and blood and death. These are highly methodic strokes on the poet's part to infuse a tone/theme within his or her collection. All these concepts are great ideas, by the way, for the collection's essay, which is due next Monday. Okay, malaria pills, 3 poems. There are 3 poems, each titled Dreams from the Malaria Pills, and then given a different person's name in parentheses as to distinguish one poem from the next. To give some background information, malaria pills are known to give horrible nightmares as well as heighten the level of suicide with those who take them. I'll go ahead and read each aloud. Dreams from the Malaria Pills, barefoot, and then we get an epigraph of different language, the calque, that postmodern stroke. He's coughing up shrapnel, jagged and rough, wondering if this is what the incantation brings. Those dream words shaping desire into being. He's questioning why blood is needed and so much. Why he's wheeled through his hometown streets on a gurney draped in camouflage sheets. Ibn Khaldun takes each piece of metal from him. These are to be made into daggers, precious gifts, and souvenirs of death. You carry the pearls of war within you, bombs swallowed whole and saved for later. Give them to your children. Give them to your love. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Dreams from the malaria pills, Bosch, Forward Operating Base, Anaconda, Iraq. This time, it's 5 a.m., lucid. Bosch can see his own hands, lifting water to his face, sees himself reflected in the mirror. An image of infinity, shaving. His beard and neck, the blade, silver and sharp under fluorescent light, as he reaches back with the razor to scrape it over the smooth dome of consciousness. that concentric heat, peeling in strips like a rind of fruit, the skin of a peach down the forehead, and over eyebrows, cheek, and jaw, sloughing the blood and skin in sink water, repeating this over and over again, his eyes focused, unfazed. Tonight he lies in his bunk. The smoky moon coals its muzzle of light with a cloudy trail. Bosch soaks his forearms in lighter fluid, flares a match head, and sets his skin on fire. He repeats this to his thighs and calves. He burns his chest like a savanna. By morning, even his head is on fire, as the sun rises up over the earth at dawn, like the open mouth of a flamethrower, 140 degrees. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And these are in order, by the way they unfolded within the collections. Just want to let you know in case you wanted to draw connections between them. And I implore you to do so, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Dreams from Malaria Pills. This is Turner himself, the author of this collection. Forward Operating Base Eagle, Iraq. This time it's beautiful. He's in the kelp beds somewhere off the California coast, floating, where green leaves touch the sun, as if he's disentangled from thought itself, as if the mind has come this far up from the depths to release him to the crests and shallows, drifting wave by wave back to shore. He knows there are bombs washed up on the beach. There are limbs of people as he has never met. Bandages soaked in blood and salt. He knows the Quran and the Bible have washed page by page to shore, their bindings stripped loose, their ink blurred into the sea. And if people are crying there, waiting out in the surf to carry it all back in, then he hasn't seen them yet. The ocean sounds in the bones of his skull, and the albatross fly reconnaissance over the waves, searching for a route home. Okay, so I think there's some great connection between these three poems. Number one, the title, of course, is binding them together, but also there's some violent imagery. Some of it is part of a dream. But some of it is what we have to believe that the speaker is talking about. This really happened after the dream, right? We get that with the last poem, the guy burning himself, the soldier burning himself. We see similar recurrent language within each of these poems too. I'm not going to say anything further about these three poems with the same title, but I would implore you, if you wish, to draw connections between each of them, and that can be the essay that's due Monday, or it could be a final essay. Well, just speaking on the final essay, it's going to be the same length, 3 to 5 pages, double space, one primary source, two secondary sources. But you can write about not the same subject matter as any of these essays that we're doing within the semester, but you could write about, obviously, the books, the various books of your choosing. So you can go back to Here Bullet and write again on it for your final essay. Okay, I didn't mention this from this PowerPoint's outset, but he mentions within a poem the idea of Barracan dunes. So Barracan dunes, you can see here, Barracan dune is a dune that's shaped like this. It's a sand avalanche, a slip face. A dune actually is moving throughout the desert. So I thought it was an interesting use. He only mentioned it once. He only mentioned the word dune once, so it's not even recurrent language. And he only mentioned this particular type of dune once. Within the poem Baghdad Zoo, Turner introduces us to a lot of animals, but he also mentions the concept of this, a Barracan dune. The definition of this particular type of dune is simple. Barracan dunes may appear as larger compound Barracan or mega Barracan dunes, which can gradually migrate with the wind as a result of erosion on the windward side and deposition on the leeward side at a rate of migration ranging from about 1 meter to 100 meters per year. Barracans usually occur as groups of isolated dunes and may form chains that extend across a plain in the direction of the prevailing wind. Barracans and megabarracans may coalesce in the ridges that extend for hundreds of kilometers. Dune collisions and changes in wind direction spawn new barracans from the horns of the old ones and govern the size distribution of a given field. So what commentary exactly is Turner attempting to infuse by utilizing the image of a Barracan dune, the concept of a Barracan dune in the desert? Well, we might think about themes of war, how it builds slowly at first. It's mobile, it's mobility, like this Barracan dune. Is this particular type of dune made up of smaller particles like soldiers, and it's seemingly perpetual. That is to say, like war, without end. Okay, so I think this poem, 2,000 pounds, I'm going to read it aloud. I don't think I'll get through all of it. It's a pretty long poem, but I would implore you, if you want to write an essay concerning 2,000 pounds and comparing it to other poetry, to do so. But I think it's exemplary of some of the poetry that's being created post 9/11, following the bombing, the terrorist bombing uh, or of the Twin Towers. And the reason I say that is because we get a number of individuals' names again within this poem, as he has done, that with through the postmodern stroke that we spoke about in literature, the idea of foregrounding the very personal and the very real individual as opposed to a group. So in this poem, I'm going to compare 2,000 pounds to Billy Collins's The Names, which I think it connects up well. And there's other post 9/11 poetry that I think make connections in the same way by individualizing the victims. In this case, we're going to see individuals at war. In The Names, we're going to see those who were victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So let's go ahead and I'll read it, or most of it. It begins 2,000 pounds. It begins simply with a fist, white-knuckled and tight, glossy and sweat, with two eyes in a rearview mirror watching for a convoy. The radio, a soundtrack that adrenaline has pushed into silence, replacing it with a heartbeat. This thump trembling over the button. A flight of gold, that's what Sefwan thinks as he lights a Miami, draws the smoke, and waits in the taxi at the traffic circle. He thinks of summer 1974, lifting pitchforks of grain high in the air, the slow drift of it like the fall of Shatha's hair. And although it was decades ago, he still loves her, remembers her standing at the canebrake, where the buffalo cooled shoulder deep in the water, pleased with the orange cups of flowers he bought her, and he regrets how so much can go wrong in life. How easily the years slip by, light as grain, bright as the street's concussion of metal, shrapnel traveling at the speed of sound to open him up in a blood and shock, a man whose last thoughts are of love and wreckage, with no one there to whisper him gone. Then we get a next section, another stanza, which is separated by what's called a vignette, a tiny little drawing to separate it. Sergeant Ladeau of the National Guard speaks but cannot hear the words coming out, and it's just as well his eardrums ruptured because it lends the world a certain calm. Though the traffic circle was filled with people running in panic, their legs a blur like horses in a carousel, turning and turning the way the tires spin on the Humvee flipped to its side. The gunner's hatch he was thrown from, a mystery to him now, a dark hole in metal the color of sand. And if he could, he would crawl back inside of it. And though his fingertips scratch at the asphalt, he hasn't the strength to move. Shrapnel is torn into his ribcage, and he will bleed to death in minutes. But he finds himself surrounded by a strange beauty, the shine of light on the broken, a woman's hand touching his face, tenderly the way his wife might, amazed to find a wedding ring on his crushed hand, the bright gold sinking in flesh, going to bone. And we'll read one more. There's a few other this, but I'll read one more for the second time. Rashid passes the bridal shop on a bicycle with Sefa beside him, and just before the air ruckles and breaks, he glimpses the sidewalk reflections. In the storefront glass, men and women, walking and talking, or not, an instant of clarity, just before each of them shatters, under the detonation's wave, as if even the idea of them were being destroyed, stripped of form, the blast tearing into the mannequins, who stood as though husband and wife. A moment before, who could not touch one another, who could not kiss, who now lie together in glass and debris, holding one another in their half-armed embrace, calling this love, if this is all there will ever be. All right, so we get the mentioning of various people's names, not just the generalized person, right, but very specific. We get the names, and we spoke about that being sort of a postmodern idea. Uh, And now I want to read, and I believe it does the same thing. And it can be these could be highly sort of related and contrasted towards each other for their similarities and their differences. And that's Billy Collins's The Names. The Names. Yesterday I lay awake in the palm of the night. A soft rain stole in, upheld by any breeze. And when I saw the silver glaze on the windows, I started with Ackerman, as it happened. Then Baxter and Calabro, Davis and Eberling, names falling into place as droplets fell through the dark. Names printed on the ceiling of the night. Names slipping around a watery bend. 26 willows on the banks of a stream. In the morning I walked out barefoot among thousands of flowers, heavy with dew like the eyes of tears, and each had a name, Fiore, inscribed on a yellow petal. then Gonzalez and Hahn, Ishikawa and Jenkins. Names written in the air and stitched into the cloth of the day. A name under a photograph taped to a mailbox, monogram on a torn shirt. I see you spelled out as storefront windows, and on the bright, unfurled awnings of the city. I say the syllables as I turn a corner, Kelly and Lee, Medina, Nardella, and O'Connor. When I peer into the woods, I see a thick tangle where letters are hidden, as in a puzzle concocted for children. Parker and Quigley in the twigs of an ash, Rizzo, Schubert, Torres, and Upton. Secrets in the boughs of an ancient maple. Names written in pale sky, names rising in the updraft amid buildings, names silent in stone, or cried out behind a door, names blown over the earth and out to sea. In the evening, weakening light, the last swallows, a boy on a lake lifts his oars. A woman by a window puts a match to a candle, and the names are outlined on the rose clouds, Vanacker and Wallace. Let X stand, if it can, for the ones unfound. Then Young and Zeminski, the final jolt of Z. Names etched on the head of a pin. One name spanning a bridge, another undergoing a tunnel. A blue name needled into the skin. Names of citizens, workers, mothers, and fathers. The bright-eyed daughter, the quick son. Alphabet of names in a green field. Names in the small tracks of birds. Names listed from a hat or balanced on the tip of the tongue. Names wheeled into the dim warehouse of memory. So many names, there is barely room on the walls of the heart. All right, wow. Powerful. It was powerful poetry. So we can start to see connections, that postmodern stroke of identifying the individual within these two poems. So we get the various people involved in war within Turner's 2,000 Pounds, and we can directly compare and contrast that to this very same thing that Billy Collins would have done. Who knows, but certainly in great proximity of the 2001 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Centers, accounting for the individual's experience, accounting for these many people that were affected, and not just generalizing it. That's a modernist sort of technique, just generalizing it, right? We saw that with Owen and with Jarrell in their war poetry. But within the postmodern stroke, within Turner, within Collins, we're definitely seeing them identify the individuals, which is part and parcel with postmodernity. Okay, so any questions? As always, email me if you have any questions or concerns concerning any of the poetry we've covered so far, any of the text, any of the. I'll turn back your or I'll remark on your essays, your initial essay, short essay next week. But if you have any questions concerning the upcoming essay that we're going to turn in by midnight on Monday, please let me know. You have to comment, hopefully, within the discussion of Here Bullet within Blackboards on the left-hand side. And tomorrow, we'll be exploring the subgenre of poetry. And we'll have a short lecture on Japanese poetry, which I think will be interesting. Email me if you have any questions. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.